Hello, everyone, and welcome to the last talk for this room for today. We are glad to have Aman here, who will talk about rethinking colors in design systems, a CSS approach to idiomatic design. I must admit, it is a long time ago that I looked into CSS, so I'm really curious to see what has changed and what your approach is in new design. And
thank you very much.
Have fun.
Hello. So let's pretend no one from the organization is here and let's rate how tired we are. If you're tired, put your hands up. Okay, if you're not tired and you're dying to see some hardcore CSS, put your hands up. Interesting. Okay, so I hope I'm not gonna bore you to death with the tiny nitty-gritty details that I pay attention to, and I hope this is going to be a shared concern going forward. Oh, nice. The slide is already up there. So, before we start, who is a front-end engineer? Okay. Now, raise your hands if you are working with colors, even if you're not a front-end engineer, like in CSS and web development. All right, okay. Today we're going to talk about some problems, and I'm going to start with your problems that you're having in dealing with colors in CSS. But before we do that, it's customary that I introduce myself. I'm Armagan Amcalar. I live in Berlin for the past 10 years. I am right now a fractional CTO. And that doesn't mean I'm half a CTO. That means I'm working for multiple companies. Neol and OpenServe are two companies that I work with right now. I love open source, and I have a lot of fun experiments from backend to frontend to brain signals. I have a JavaScript project that allows you to type with your brain signals if you have that headset above that one that I'm using. And it's fully open source and has been for the last 6 years, I guess. So if you haven't heard about it, maybe this weekend you might want to check it out. I also write a lot of frameworks, front-end and back-end frameworks, and this is kind of where this comes from, this itch comes from, because at every new company that I work for, there's a desire to create a new design system. And whenever I have the chance to create a new design system, I rethink my experiences, what I have done in the past, and I try to do better this time. And this talk is practically a story that came out of one of those struggles that I had. But before we start, I also love to do interactive sessions. It helps people stay awake. So you can raise your hands and tell me if you had any problems with colors in design systems. What is your experience? How do you work with colors? What is a typical color implementation for you? Like you write background color, colon, and what comes afterwards? What do you type? And don't be shy. We're all friends here, and I just want to help you out. So I'm not gonna bite. Please. You write a colon. Yes, what comes afterwards? A new line? Okay. Interesting. So you go like background color, colon, new line? Ah, okay. All right. So you write a hexadecimal a series of numbers, right? Either 3, 4, 6, or 8. And never 8? Does anyone know what happens if you have 8 characters after the pound sign in a color declaration? Please. Yes, they're alpha values. So you're practically doing RGBA, which is great. And if you didn't know, maybe that's the only thing you can remember out of this session. But I'm very happy that we're starting to generate value for everyone. Okay, Any other types of writing colors? I assume, like, is that how you always do colors in a project? Yeah, you have custom properties. HSL, nice. Does anyone know what HSL stand for? Not you. You obviously know it. Anyone else? No one? I guess. Yes, someone over there. Hue, saturation, and luminescence. Yes, this hue thing is huge, pun unintended. It's going to come up a lot, I guess, throughout the day. It's practically what defines the color. In the color wheel, you pick the hue, and then in HSL mode, you can pick saturation to define whether it's like grayscale or very saturated, and luminosity, luminescence, lightness. I actually always confuse those. And that kind of tells about the brightness of the color. So in RGB mode, you have red, green, and blue, 3 different values to define a color, and it's a mixture of those numbers. In HSL, you have hue, which defines the tone, the actual color once, and then you have parameters, modifiers on top for saturation and for lightness or luminosity. Actually, someone can look that up so that I don't like keep making the same mistake forever in the Silk. All right, so you have custom variables sometimes to define some colors. What happens if you need to change one color to another one, like change all the blues to red? What does that workflow look like, please? A design toolkit so that we can change quickly. How would it work? You have file for color constants that define all the colors that you have, and hopefully you define all the blues once there, right? Is there anyone with that kind of an experience? I've never seen a project that can define a color only in one place, because there are like hover colors, right? Something like what happens when it's active, what happens when it's a warning or a background or a border color. Anyway, so I have had a lot of problems with this. I'm not sure how much of those problems are resonating in the room right now, but I hope it's going to be more and more clear when you see this. So raise your hands if you ever saw something like this in your developer journey. Very good. Only so few people. You're so lucky, the rest of you. If you haven't seen anything like this, this is kind of a nightmare for a front-end engineer, because the design system, and this one in particular, is from Atlassian. Do you know the company Atlassian? They make Jira, like very famous, right? They also have a design system, of course, that they want us to use. And they're doing a pretty good job, actually. But I'm not sure if we can really call it a design system, and I'm going to talk more about this in a little bit. But this is basically what they give you for colors. They give you saturated colors, that's what they say, and a lot of shades of those colors. And then you are free to do whatever you like with them. Now your designer picks some colors out of this, some shades, and gives them to you in terms of variables, and you're supposed to use them. And sometimes there are like, for each color, you pick like 5 or 6 different shades because you want different shades for everything. And then it's maybe, yeah, it becomes something like this. You might have some variable names like this, like, I don't know, cyan 300, gray 400, purple, indigo 700. And these are the colors that you define and use. But the problem is, my first problem, and I would love to know if you agree, these numbers just don't mean anything to me. And I'm struggling a little bit with short and long-term memory. So I can actually never remember, like, what numbers were we using? And these are all available to me in the design system. And this is from Bootstrap. So how do I know if I need to implement a design? Let's say the designer is modern and they did something in Figma. How do I know which color it is? I click the element, I look at the variable that they're using, and it turns out that it's blue 500. And that's what I type in my CSS. That's a very standard common workflow in working with colors in design systems. And then companies are trying to help with this. Atlassian has a lot of really nice tokens that you can use. Color text. So everything starts with color. It's a variable. It's a JavaScript object and a CSS object and everything. So you can define, well, they use CSS and JS. So you can define color text or color icon accent green or color background brand bold. Now, these are names you can remember, and autocomplete really helps in this situation. It pulls up whatever you have available. But then this still doesn't really prevent you from making mistakes of combining different colors that shouldn't go together, because these are all variables that are available to you. And in your designs, whatever you want, like you have a box that you want to color, you can use any of those. So how do you know, again, which one to use? The answer is, unfortunately, you don't. Oh, yeah. This is also a very similar, or I guess, common implementation in color. You have something like this: color purple, color yellow 300, indigo 900, and your entire application is full of these things. And what happens if you decide that, let's say for accessibility reasons, you need to change background colors to a different color or shade? How are you going to go about that? You cannot find and replace all indigo 900s. You cannot go and replace all yellow 300s. It just doesn't work like that. And some items need a different shade of indigo, and some items need a different shade of yellow. So, how's it going so far? Do any of these things relate with what you're doing daily? Please raise your hand. And it's okay to not. Like, I'm not going to be offended, because I'm telling you, like, this is a niche problem that I had, and I thought multiple people would have a similar problem, and that's why I'm here. This is from Ant Design. Exactly the same thing. They give you magenta 10, geek blue 5. It's almost like hair dye colors, right? You go to a shop and you buy some dyes for your hair. They also come in numbers, or so I'm told. It's very difficult. But yeah, thank you for catching that one. So look at this. This is how you do it in Ant Design. You are defining your theme, right? And you have to pick something. Color success background hover. That is legitimately something that you need to use or customize. How are you going to find what you need here? And if you want to make some of the colors look like the others, like let's say you want to have color success text and color success border the same. It's very difficult to manage this. Like you are, like they shove down all of the variables in your face, and it feels like these things are designed from a different perspective. This is Carbon. Does anyone know who owns Carbon? Who develops Carbon? No one? It's IBM. I'm not surprised. But they also do a great job. All of the design systems that I've talked about, or the frameworks or whatever you call them, are doing a great job in working with components, layouts, everything. And also some are doing great with colors as well. But I could say color is the weakest link there. Only beaten by accessibility. Accessibility is unfortunately the worst accessibility support. Anyway, the problems with color. How do you know which shades you need to use when? In hover, in active, when you tab with keyboard navigation, how do you know which shades you need? I can never remember those numbers when we use 700. I cannot even remember them for fonts. And for fonts, we only have like 5 or 6 categories, like light, regular, bold, bolder, and so on. Like I can never know the exact font number. You have to know which tokens your design system gives you. And the problem is, again, there is nothing that prevents you from messing with color. You can write color declarations in anywhere in your CSS and make something a different color. And your designers or your product managers may demand that from you. They might say, hey, do this different color. And yeah. Why are we doing it? Any ideas? Like, why is this the default way of dealing with CSS or colors? There is no other way. Good. Very good. Yes. Any other thoughts? Should there be a better way? Like, raise your hand if you agree if there should be a better way of dealing with colors. Well, almost everyone. Okay. Good. Great. I also agree. And the question is, are we developing a framework for design systems, or are we developing a design system? I think that's the biggest question that we need to answer. Most of what I've shown you, Ant Design, Carbon, Bootstrap, whatever, they are not design systems in their own rights. They are frameworks for building design systems. And you should probably never use them as they come out of the box, because they give you too much flexibility and not enough constraints. And one of the biggest benefits of a design system is that it gives you a lot of constraints. It prevents you from doing mistakes, right? It helps you facilitate faster, better, more consistent designs by sometimes giving you the opportunity to build your own user interfaces and experiences without the help of a designer, because there are patterns that you put together, an input box, a button, they make a form, and like that's part of your design system, your custom component. And there, I guess we come to a conclusion that it's actually a big problem that there are so many colors and all of these variables are open to us. If you're building a single application like Windows, macOS, and you get the idea of a single application, or a web application like Airbnb, you maybe need like 5 colors and 5 shades, but they have very specific purposes. So again, I told you in the beginning that this came out of a journey that we had at Neol, designing a design system from scratch. And of course, we started with color as well. And my designer came up with a color palette that they wanted to use. And they defined this like 7 main colors, and it's a very colorful web page. So we want to be abundant with color. Like everywhere, the designers might choose to use a different color. So we have these 7 colors, and then they said, you know, we're gonna have like 15 shades, 13 shades for each. And this is the same nightmare. And I said, well, we shouldn't really do this. It's not really useful. And the way they do this is by picking these colors and then doing operations with them. And this is kind of a spoiler. But then we reduced it to this small palette of, I don't know, 35 colors. You might have a hard time seeing, but there's another column here. So this was our set. I'm separating black, white, and gray shades because they serve a different purpose. But these were the colors that we came up with. And there is a specific alignment within these colors. Can you spot anything if you look at these colors and their shades? There's a specific correlation. Anyone? Same brightness. Yeah. Same hue. Yeah. Yep. So the goal for colors in design is, of course, like you want different shades, but you try to make them as realistic as possible. So when you're using purple, you want all shades of purple to have the same hue, the same sweetness, the same color. I don't actually know how to define hue. It's the tone of the color. The dictionaries also don't really help. And you just play with brightness, but brightness is very tricky. How do you add brightness to something? An easy way is to add some white to it. Or when you want to add darkness, an easy way is to add some black to it to come up with different shades. And this is practically what we did. But it was very difficult, and maybe this is the most difficult part in terms of coming up with these shades. The designers have to sit through this with a screen on their faces, basically, to make sure that the luminance and like all of the other colors or parameters are the same in different shades across different colors, so we can use them interchangeably. So here's the thing. A design system has 3 roles working on it. One is the designer. The other one is the person who's developing the design system. And the other one is the person who is developing the UI with that design system. So designer wants to use as many colors as possible. They want creative flexibility. The design system developer does not want to increase the number of colors. They want to limit it, and they want a structure around those colors. And the UI developer just wants the simplest implementation, as simple as possible. So whenever you're building UIs, you should not have to think of which color to apply, basically the caveats that I talked about. And it should be really, really straightforward. Like you should be able to understand at a glance what color an implementation is without looking at Figma, without looking at like, oh, what is this in hover? Okay, what is this in active state right now when you're developing a new UI? So we need a better approach. I'm happy that we all align on this as well, to align all 3 roles, the designers, the design system developers, and the UI developers as well. It should feel natural, easy to create, think of, and use. Now, here's an example in code. This is very simple. HTML code here, and like it should look like this. How do I add color to this? There's a card component here. The background is white. There's a card component with some shadow, H1, some text, some inputs with borders and stuff. If you look at it though, there are multiple shades. Can you actually count how many different shades there are in this design? 3, 4, 5. I guess I counted 5. This is ugly to code. This means like you have, we call this color rows. You need to use rows 100, 200, 300, 400, and 500 separately for different aspects of the code. And there is no like correlation between them, right? Like this is not maintainable, and this is very close to an actual design. Of course, it's very difficult to see, right? So like this is white here, but this is not exactly white. This card has a very light background color of the same hue, and the inputs as well. They have different backgrounds and different borders and so on. So the bigger problem is when I want to have multiple of these things. How does that actually work? Now I need to add 5 more variables, right? And I need to make sure that the border here has the same number, like 500, as the border here. That is tough. And again, this is very close to an actual design that we had, not in terms of login, but with other components inside. And this is a realistic need in certain web design elements. So why are we struggling with colors? Why do we do this? And what can be an alternative choice? Can we think algorithmically about this thing? And that's practically what we set out to do. I asked our design team to come up with the same mechanism for each color to create the shades. And these, like in this direction, you get these colors by adding white. And in this direction, you get the colors by adding black. And now, not all shades work well together. And I asked them to pick 5 or 6 different shades. And they said, okay, the 10s are very similar. The 20s are very similar to one another. The 30s, the 50s, and so on. So they picked multiple shades that look very similar in terms of hue and brightness, like saturation and brightness in the vertical axis. And then I said, okay, that's great. So let's implement that as a function of what? Shade as a function of, how should we define this? Amount of light, interesting. Oh, amount of white, right. Yeah, that definitely has to be a parameter, right? The amount of white and also the amount of black in those colors. But what is it a function of? Sorry? Importance. Very good. We're almost getting there. So I'm not gonna bore you to death because this is a very disgusting word. I couldn't find a better term for this. Shade as a function of function. So the first function is a mathematical function and the second function is its use. And that is, for example, borders. All the borders in your application should have the same tint or the same function. Like take the base color. Are you going to add 20% white to it for the borders? You add 20% white to all of your base colors. Are you going to add 30% black to a background in the dark mode? Do that. So in design, nothing is used or built just because it's fancy. They are built because they serve a purpose. And I was thinking of like changing the slides before the talk, like shade as a function of purpose, maybe. That could also work well. But it's basically what we need. And frameworks have finally acknowledged this, and they're offering certain programmatic color manipulation because no one can manage those numbers anymore. But it's still very deep in the framework, so you have to dig them out. And you can literally change the algorithm that creates the shades. And if you have a centralized way of applying those shades, then you solve your CSS color problem. Ant Design is one of my favorites. They have a separate package to calculate these colors. It happens in runtime, so not very easy to change. It happens at compile time, not very easy to change in runtime because it gives you fixed colors, hex numbers. Bootstrap has 2 functions, tint color, shade color, and all the others that I have cited today have similar solutions. But I actually want to show you something. Let's see. Where are we? Oh, here we are. So this is the same UI. Let's make it super big. Maybe the colors will be visible then. And oh no, it's very ugly. and I want to change its color. So the UI application developer should be able to do just this. And all of the colors and all of the functions should update automatically. I can have blue, or one of the colors that we have is grass. And you don't need to change anything. No color. If you want to apply multiple colors to a design, and if you want to let your designers to be as creative as they want, but you still need consistency in everything, and you do practically, and I'm sure you're not noticing it, but the box shadow is also changing color. Because in color theory, not all shadows are black. It's a mixture of its color, especially if it's giving off light. So this should be the solution to my problem, just by changing what I see. And if I look at the design, I can tell, well, okay, this is grass. Or we have another color, sun. Well, this is built in sun. If you're not colorblind, this is straightforward to see. And you don't have to worry with any other color in your application. The way to achieve this. Wait, is this interesting so far? Are you sure? Okay. Let's see how this works. So now we're looking at the design system code. Okay. I declare a tinted class, and I just declare the colors in it. So for H1s, I mix black at 80%. For paragraphs, I mix black at 30%. So black is 70% and the original color is 30%. For the card, we have background color, border color, box shadow. For the inputs, we have our colors. And this is written only once. You write this only once, so that no one has to deal with color again. So whatever color you have in your application, you define in a centralized place like this, and no one touches that. And of course, there's one more level of detail in the design system, and it's your actual root colors. At the root, you can define your variables, your color variables. This is very typical. And you can have some CSS classes to add them. So in your HTML, you write card, which is tinted, in the sun color. So what sun does is to bring this as a CSS variable here, setting the color to sun. And then you just have two functions. Color mix, which is a relatively new CSS functionality. I think it's supported by around 90% of the browsers, which is really good. Like all major browsers and all major versions support this, which is unfortunately not true for some other CSS properties like relative color, to derive color from another color. Take a base color and derive, change some parameters of it. For example, in HSL, take an RGB color and in HSL change the saturation or luminosity. That's unfortunately not supported in every browser. There is no support in Firefox yet. It's going to come in the next version. In Safari, there's only partial support. That's why I had to show you some example code of how you could achieve a similar thing in Safari. Unfortunately, you have to do a fallback. But color mix is widely supported, and all it does is to take a color and add another color to it at a certain weight. I'm using SAS here. You didn't have to, but like you can directly hard code this color mix into your styles as well. This would also work. but I just wanted to spice things up a little bit and remove some of the noise. So with this, you can have an algorithmic way of defining what your colors are, and no one has to worry about any differences or shades in color anymore. Your designers are happy because colors are consistent. They're always applied with this certain set of rules that have been defined. No one touches this file. And your design system developers are happy. Developers, application or UI developers don't use random colors. The only parameter the application developer can change here is what class they can add to this. Let's go back to rows. I like it. This is it. So this is very idiomatic in terms of here application development, just tinted with rows. In terms of design system development, this is now an actual design system that your teams can use because it's giving you a lot of constraints. And then some variables to make it all happen. All right, we don't have much time left, so I want to ask if you have any questions, please. Yes. Yes. Very good question. What would I do? I think I would add another tinted div here. Something like this. Let's see if this actually will work. I have no idea. I've never tried this. Well, I mean, this is not going to be a card, right? The input is blue. Maybe if I do this. Yeah, works. So if you want to color anything, just add tinted to it. And then type the name of the color, please. It doesn't do anything other than to apply these. Yeah, it's just a parent class. So that, you know, regular H1s don't get colors. Only the tinted ones do. And there's a plethora of ways to write this CSS. Like you could change it however you like. But, you know, it's very simple. Now, my actual question is, why is this not a default way of working with colors in CSS and in building applications? There has to be a catch somewhere, right? With respect to what we're used to doing. And I don't know. Any other questions? Please. So I actually found a way to do that. I add an attribute called DS for design system to a parent element like the body. I wish we could do this because this would mean all of your application is running with the new design system. I add something like this, data DS3. You can add this to any component that you have moved over to this new system. And then you do tinted should apply only to data ds equals 3. You use an attribute selector to just, you know, apply this to the components that you have carried over. Does that make sense? Thank you. Any other questions? Please. Good. What is the difference between color mix and color mix relative? So these are two different syntaxes, two different functionalities that is made available in CSS. Color mix only allows you to mix two colors, but not play with different parameters. So you can mix blue and yellow, but not take blue as a color and add more brown to it. And then, you know, or add more red and change the green and zero out the blue. So relative allows you to do that. Relative allows you to take it apart to all parameters. So you can change, you can actually see here, I'm taking the sRGB color and changing the R and the G and the B individually. So you can also take an RGB color and change LCH or OKLCH color domain and play with all the parameters, or HSL as well. And unfortunately, we are out of time. But I had one last slide. What about other color spaces? Because CSS allows you to use many different color spaces. And I'm going to leave this as a homework to you because I'm also a teacher and I like doing this thing. If you're interested in color, please play with different color modes, color spaces like HSL. There is a very good web page that allows you to play with OKLCH, which is trying to achieve basically what I just showed to you in a different way. It's very wonky. This is like a very nice tool to play with. So please play with it and see. And in the presentation, I also have a couple of resources. This article is amazing. Evil Martians article on OKLCH. When you get the slides, you can look it up. And hopefully you're going to have as many troubles as I do with CSS colors and also the solution. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We have actually 2 more questions.
right.
One is how to pick color and what shade intensity to use for accessibility compliance.
Very good. I'm very happy to at least tell you that there are online applications that measure accessibility, and the biggest thing about accessibility is contrast of between the pixels, background color, foreground color, text, or boxes. And when you're applying these to your design system, there are browser extensions that you can also add to your browser to measure these differences. In fact, Google Chrome Developer Tools also does that, gives you a contrast ratio, and you just make sure that it's, they also give you scores. You make sure it's AA, AA. For accessibility, that's a very high mark. And if you're not getting AA, you should change your shades, basically.
And the last question is, what's your favorite color?
My favorite color is actually grass or mint green. I just love it. It is, in fact, this color.
All right. Thank you very much, Amma. It was a pleasure to have you. And with this, we are finished in this track.